In the heart of the Rocky Mountains, two long-distance hiking trails intersect twice, the Colorado Trail and the Continental Divide Trail. Where they meet, they create a 160-mile loop running through the densest concentration of 14,000-foot peaks in the state. I decided to walk it, alone, and it starts right here at the Twin Lakes Trailhead. How did it go? It was pretty great. At the trailhead. That's it. I'm off. I should lock the car. I did lock the car. Alright, 160 miles. Let's go. I started at the Twin Lakes Trailhead and wound my way along the shores of the lake before the trails split and climbed up into the mountains. Back and forth along endless climbing slopes, the trail passed me through gorgeous pine and aspen groves before I got my first breathtaking view and settled into the valley for my first night in the mountains. It was only 8 miles and 1,800 feet of elevation gain, but the altitude meant that I was absolutely exhausted by the time I made it to camp. I'll admit I was actually rather nervous and had gotten myself from Minnesota to the trailhead through blind force of will, but this first view down the valley quite literally took my breath away and solidified in my mind that this is where I wanted to be, more than anywhere, and I was going to make it. Such were my thoughts that in the night I dreamed I got injured and had to bail after just one day. When I woke at 5:30, I was so relieved to be healthy and whole that it made my first mountain sunrise all the more beautiful. Day 2 started off with an enormous climb that just kept going and going. Yesterday was 1,800 feet gain. Today was 4,800 feet. And in the grips of altitude, dehydration, and loss of appetite, it meant that day 2 was as rough as it got on trail for me before I stumbled onto a flat spot of ground premature of my goal for that day. Even that morning, I was not moving quickly.
This is all the faster I go. This morning. You can definitely feel the altitude. It's just one long climb to the top. And there's only so fast that I can go. Oh, a nice flat spot.
I remember being stubbornly optimistic for the whole ordeal, despite how terrible I felt, and admittedly, I had some of the most gorgeous scenery to keep my mind preoccupied.
I feel like I'm in the Sound of Music with a little bit less sun. And in a valley instead of on top of a hill. Yeah, gorgeous. Okay, picture time. But I'm looking forward to getting over altitude in a few days. Getting acclimated. Feeling okay, feeling better. Looking forward to it.
When evening came around, I practically crawled onto the first piece of flat ground that could hold my tarp, which surprisingly had one of the best views of any campsite on trail, even if I was too exhausted to get more than this one shot of the view. Day 2 was the low point of the adventure for sure. After a rough morning waking up, I hit the trail determined to beat the altitude, and was rewarded with more of what I had come to love the previous days: endless forests, breathtaking valleys, and plentiful mountain streams crossing my path. By the time I found camp for the night in a valley split 3 ways, I was feeling much better, and it started with a beautiful sunrise that morning, followed by the only true breakfast I ate on trail in an effort to stave off exhaustion that day.
Check out that view.
That's the pass. I slept like a stone that night, and with the promise of walking by Mount Princeton Hot Springs the following day, I was feeling much better than in the morning. Day 4 found me traversing the lower slopes of the mountain range and taking a long road walk past Mount Princeton Hot Springs. I debated about stopping to enjoy the springs, but I was feeling so good I just wanted to keep going. I ended the day with a group of thru hikers I had been leapfrogging on trail, and I remember that evening sharing stories and swapping trail food as the most fun I had at camp by far. This was the day I finally felt strong and alive. The miles flew past, and there's no better indication of how good I felt that I almost entirely forgot to get video that day. Mount Princeton was an excellent rest spot to get some snacks, and I wish I had gotten some video of it. But after quickly charging electronics, I kept going and did 4 more miles than I planned. I'd been looking forward to this stretch of trail because it was the final section on the eastern half. This was my last day of the rolling forest of Aspen, and with my legs feeling stronger than ever, I reveled in how fast I was able to go on the wonderfully smooth trail. It was with excitement that I stopped for the night, a mere 4 miles from the halfway point.
Anyway. 3 days ago, I would have been crawling up this. I would have been, actually, I'll show you. I was moving this slowly 3 days ago. Barely able to make this pace up these inclines. I'm really glad I'm feeling a lot stronger. Hoping it continues. In less than 6 miles to the junction where the Colorado Trail continues, and I go on to the Continental Divide Trail. Much higher. Hopefully much more wild.
Can you do thunderstorm in your camp? Somebody gave me couscous. Mediterranean couscous. It's good. Feeling good. I shared my camp with a group of 9 who were also doing the Collegiate Loop. We all knew tomorrow was the big day, and we were all looking forward to it. I woke before them and started my climb through the valley, the views getting more and more breathtaking, feeling an unbelievable sense of purpose as I neared the top, climbing above tree line for the first time. Exhausted, I stood at 12,000 feet in the morning light. This was my halfway point, and I looked back at my starting point, 80 miles and 6 days behind me.
I'll be waiting in the car, don't forget the camera. If you wouldn't mind, could you find my yellow shoes? I think they're under the stairs.
At the top of this is the Continental Divide Trail and the halfway point. And I can see the sign. What a view. You can see it. There's the sign. Well, here I am, at the halfway point, where the Colorado Trail meets the Continental Divide Trail. And let me tell you, the view is definitely worth it up here. It's 80 some miles done, 80 some miles to go. Let's get to it. From the halfway point, I hugged the left side of the peaks and stopped for a quick resupply at the Monarch Crest General Store
before walking the top of a ski resort and continuing on the beautifully barren and exposed ridgeline. Eventually, after rounding a mountain, I dropped onto a series of alpine lakes where I finally made camp. This stretch of trail was my favorite by far. The morning light, open blue skies, and a trail that stretched on and on into the distance made me feel like I was in a storybook. Coming from days of dense forests and winding trails of the eastern route, having the entire world open up around me was magical, and I marveled at how I could see the trail like a tiny pale line on the peaks ahead of me.
I really hope that this is a Fellowship of the Ring type moment, coming over the pass. Okay, maybe the next one.
Just taking a quick rest. Airing out my feet.
Okay, this should be the Fellowship of the Ring moment. Oh, yeah. Hill climb.
With the shadow of an enormous thunderhead above me, I descended off the ridgeline and made my way into the valley below. There, sheltered from the wind, I sat and rested in perhaps the most idyllic spot I found on the whole trail, surrounded by wildflowers and the gentle sound of a mountain brook that was stark contrast to the howling wind not an hour before. The next day, with a threat of huge thunderstorms, I decided to take a day off and take a 2-mile detour to a hostel in Monarch called the Butterfly House, with a friend I met on trail. We showed up and had no idea what to expect, but the Butterfly House defied all expectations.
The Butterfly House.
A beautiful patchwork quilt of people and styles permeated every inch of the Butterfly House. We walked through the unlocked front door, looking to check in, and were instead greeted by hungover but cheerful hikers who insisted we join them at breakfast at the ski lodge down the road. After grabbing a clean pillowcase to mark our beds, we were out the door, and the stories and experiences of my fellow hikers hit me like a wave. An older man in his 60s who was a men's health counselor, 2 nurses, a divorced father who talked nonstop about his daughter and nearly jumped for joy when I offered him audiobooks, an expressionistic painter, and a film crew following said expressionistic painter with donkeys. Yes, donkeys. And they were fantastic. All in all, the Butterfly House was a wonderful break from the trail, and although the thunderstorms never came that day and I technically wasted hiking time, there's no doubt it was excellent time spent, and I'm so glad I stopped.
It's like 6 a.m. Walking on the side of the highway. Gonna get back on trail. Rather, it's just all over the place. No idea what to do, but I'm gonna try.
After retracing my steps to get back on the Continental Divide, I set off nervous about the weather, but excited to get back into the mountains. The trail wound through lush valleys and over barren saddles. Although at first it was gorgeous and sunny, eventually the clouds packed in, and I decided to take shelter right below the big climb above treeline. Knowing that thunderstorms would likely hit later that day, I soaked up the sun and enjoyed every bit of the breathtaking valley I walked through. In the distance, I saw a huge elk slowly cross the path and look back down the valley at me, which was the closest I ever got to wildlife on trail. Cresting Chalk Creek Pass was far more beautiful than I was prepared for, made even more heart-stopping by how quiet it was in the calm breeze of the mountains.
It's pretty amazing.
I didn't know it at the time, but this was the last true window of sunshine I'd get for the next few days, and I loved every minute of it. This was where I truly felt I was in the mountains. trail wound along an old railroad bed that was said to be haunted, and the lake before the pass had mountain lion troubles recently, but the clouds rolling in gave me the most pause.
I'm sheltering from the rain. Waiting out the storm. A little bit freaky. There was a lightning strike, probably like not less than a mile away. Never heard something like that. These whole mountains just amplify it. Plus, when you're like this close to the lightning and the thunder, it just feels so different. It's wild. And a little terrifying, but that's kind of to be expected. Oh, am I flickering?
As I was waiting for the storm to pass, the same group of 9 hikers I stayed with 3 days before walked up, and we ended up crossing the pass together. The landscape was barren and strange, and I absolutely loved feeling like I was walking through another planet. That night, after picking up another friend on trail, we made camp and watched the fog pack in around us, wondering if it would dissipate by morning.
Well, anyway, the thunder had really moved on. Like, it was right above me for a while. But then moved on. It's way in the distance over there now. I could actually barely hear it. But I gotta say, thunderstorm at the tree line. That's something else entirely. Never heard thunder like that.
Not less than an hour ago, this place was a thunderstorm. And now it's just dead quiet. I think that's one of the things that surprises me most about these mountains is just how quiet they can get. Except for the wildlife chirping. I woke to a valley filled with fog. The trail quickly climbed to 12,500 feet and stayed there, cutting across endless talus fields in the shadow of the peaks. The fog was unyielding on this side of the mountain, and I only escaped it when I crawled over the pass.
It's the day to cross Tinka Pass and go all the way to Cottonwood Pass. This is the big one, 20.7 miles, all above tree, or mostly all above tree line, very exposed. And we're starting the day in thick fog.
How did you know where to find me? What did you think you would see? I live alone in a state you without it. I drink you down with my feet. And that's love that keeps me alive.
In hindsight, I got lucky with this weather. My biggest fear for this entire hike had been getting caught in this specific section during a thunderstorm. With very little cover, it would have been unpleasant to share my trail with so much lightning, to say the least. Having endless mist and not a whisper of thunder soothed my fears, and I ended up loving the mysterious and otherworldly feel of a black stone trail shrouded in fog.
What did you see through my window? Catching a glimpse of devotion. It's just a light from a shining casino. Something is all in motion. And there's sorrow in my eyes. And I'm safe to breathe through life. Can I borrow?
Can't even see what the sun is.
Just to keep me alive. I don't care if the darkness is soon to arrive. Just save me a place in my hunger.
Eventually, I crested a pass and climbed out of the mist and into the sun, and it was the most incredible feeling after a morning without it.
That's the misery. Oh.
I just walked out of that.
and walked into this.
I got one more climb, and then I'm out of this high exposed area.
The sunlight was short-lived, but I loved it anyway. The trail dropped below treeline briefly before climbing back up into the peaks, where I got pounded by some of the harshest wind and rain yet. Pushing myself to blindly follow the trail despite my numbing hands and feet, I finally dropped out of the clouds and made it into the valley below. The worst was behind me.
Well, I couldn't film for a bit because I was going over the path, which is shrouded in clouds right now. But I did. I made it over. And it stopped raining now that I got to a lower elevation, but for a while there was strong winds, really heavy rain. And now I get to walk into this valley.
Despite some rather unpleasant hours that day, I finished this section in rather good humor, proud I had made it safely over the pass, and feeling the end of the trail was near. Even the clouds couldn't dampen my spirits.
Yes, we've had one rainstorm. What about a second rainstorm?
Day 10 saw a brief return to the lower slopes of the mountains, the trail and the tree line weaving together in a dance that ended with a climb up another 12,500 foot pass before darting back into the cover of the trees. After the intense struggle of Cottonwood and Tin Cup Pass the day previous, it was a welcome break. Although I'd like to say I loved every minute of being in the wild, this day was a low point in how I felt, not at all physically, but emotionally. After coming down a particularly rocky slope, I saw an older woman with a beautiful dog slowly making their way up to me. I could tell she was having a hard time of it, but when we passed each other, she still greeted me with a grin that could have summoned a rainbow. We talked for a bit about how tough things were, each of us keeping our true reasons for feeling low private, but connecting over the emotional weight of our burdens. "I've hiked a lot of trails with this one," she said, affectionately patting her dog on the side, "and every one is rough in some way. Every time, I keep going through the bad times, and eventually I get somewhere and I realize it's just..." She paused and looked back behind her, at the valley tumbling into the distance. "Beautiful, and I'm glad to be there," she finished. "I think we'll both get to that point today." I didn't know her name. I didn't know where she came from, but that encounter eased the weight more than I could ever say.
That was a climb.
I settled into a comfortable rhythm with the rain, getting lucky with putting on and off my rain gear, and staying remarkably comfortable considering the conditions. Knowing that I only had one more day, I settled into camp that night, excited for the final stretch.
I woke up and everything inside the tent was wet too. I looked like it wasn't going to stop raining. In general. And that's what we got today. But it's the very last day. And I'm actually pretty pleased with how I packed up everything. I feel like if I bunker down again, get everything out, and probably get a good night's sleep, mostly dry. We got Hope Pass coming up. It's the last big climb. I've got flat for about 3 miles, I think, which I'm going to try to crush. And then it's a 12,000 foot climb, and then a 12,000 foot descent. So my knees are feeling good, my legs are feeling good. Got a long day ahead. But actually no, not a long day, because it's only 15 miles. That's it. 15 miles in constant rain. Probably not going to stop to eat much because I gotta go, gotta get moving. Okay, I'm gonna try to crush these miles. See you on the other side.
In high spirits, I set off on the last 15 miles of my adventure. It was a grueling climb straight over Hope Pass, through the wind and fog. I poured all of my strength I had gained over the past 10 days into this last ascent, and pushed myself harder than ever. However, when I reached the trailhead much faster than expected, it was because I had a truly surprising factor at play. I accidentally joined an ultramarathon. The Trans Rockies Run followed the same trail, At first, runners passed me, but as we got higher and higher, and I got more and more determined, I started to keep pace with them, until I crested the pass and was so full of joy, I started running myself down the other side to the sound of ringing cowbells and cheers.
They're cheering me on. I'm not even part of the race.
It was so cold at elevation, I had to put socks in my hands to keep them from freezing, and my GoPro battery gave out just as I was getting into the forest of the other side. With my big camera packed away, I used my phone to document the last stretch of my adventure through the rolling foothills along Twin Lakes, and before I knew it, I was standing in front of a very familiar sign.
12 days ago, I think, at least last Saturday, I stood here and I took the Collegiate East route right there. And now, here I am, however many days later. It's Tuesday, I think. After a grueling morning going up over Hope's Pass, I finally where it links back up. 160.7 miles of backpacking through Colorado. Finally done. Okay, let's get to this trailhead. 12 days? Something? Last Saturday. That's all I know. Okay, there's water in here.
It was actually 11 days, but there's a reason I lost track of time. This was without a doubt the most wild adventure I had ever been on, full of everything I hoped for and stories I could have never predicted. There's a piece of my heart still singing with the morning dawn in the aspen forest on the east side. I left tears of quiet joy on a calm stretch of trail far above treeline in the company of dozens of tiny white butterflies dancing around me. I found a new definition of determination and self-worth as I pushed myself up miles of vertical climbs, gasping for air and feeling the limits of my body with every step. And I found beauty. I found it brimming over every barren peak and every forest thick with the feeling of life. I had never felt more like myself than those moments watching the trail bury itself into the horizon and knowing I was chasing the edge of the earth in front of me. And for all of that, for the people I met, the paths I walked, for the beauty and the majesty, the Collegiate Loop was truly the greatest adventure I've ever had.